Alright, we're going to walk through the install of an ADC, or an additional domain controller. We've already gone through the preparing to install a domain controller. If we go to this TID 7009927, gives you some ideas to look at, to consider as far as preparing to install. Make sure you have a successful install. So big things: the etc resolve. Make sure your host name is in there correctly. You want to, that's got to be done. So if we look at this server right here, this is our first DSfW server. So if we list the etc hosts file, we see the name of our domain. We want to make sure that we have the same thing on this server. We've got our domain name, and we list the etc resolve.conf. We want to modify this and make sure that we have the proper DNS server so we can resolve it. So let's go ahead and modify that. Okay, so now we should be able to resolve ns, not nds, ns lookup dsfw.novell.com, and we can resolve it. So those are some of the key pieces. Already anyway, again, just go through this TID or watch the other video that goes as far as preparing to install DSfW. So we'll go ahead and get the install started here. It's just the add-on products, and then we go from there. Okay, here we go. We're just going to select domain services for Windows. Leave everything else checked. Say if you want to, if you know for sure you're not going to be using iPrinter, you can remove that, but otherwise I would just leave it as a default if you think you might need it in the future. DNS on this server, it doesn't actually have to be installed, but again, just leave everything there. You'll have the option to actually configure it a little later on if you'd like. If you don't have a backup DNS server, I would highly recommend installing it. If you're unsure if you're going to need it or not, install it, because you will not be able to go back on an ADC server and install DNS again. You have to do it at the time of the install. So that's one of the limitations to consider. Okay, here we're ready to actually do the install. As you can see, it's just the eDirectory screens, just like the first one we did, first domain controller, existing tree. I'm going to do DSfW. If you're not using Secret Store, I'd recommend unchecking it. You can always go back and install that or reconfigure it with no problems if you want to use it in the future. But otherwise, I would just remove it. Next, you want to use the IP address of the existing DNS server in the tree, not just an eDirectory server, but the existing DNS, or not DNS, existing domain controller DSfW server in the tree. So that in this case it's the .4 server, so that's what we want to use is for it. Of course, again, you want to have a user that has supervisory rights to the tree. So if you're not using admin, make sure your user has rights to the tree. Div location is just the default. Time server, SLP configuration, and then on our nmas piece, which should be coming up here shortly, you can just leave it as default. You can select all. It doesn't matter. It's going to install the methods that it needs. Now, in this case, we're onto the DSfW part of the actual configuration. The domain part, I should say. So we have our three options. We want to choose a new domain controller in an existing domain, DSfW domain. So this has to be populated from that etc host file. So make sure that that's correct. I'm going to show you a couple different things here. So we've got this. We'll show you what the configuration looks like between these two here. Well, if we don't choose a DNS server, and this is where you have the option to install or configure DNS on this server. If you don't do it at this time, you're not going to be able to do it. And also add replicas. You can do it at this time. This you could go and add these replicas later. I'll do it just so you can see it in the provisioning wizard, but sometimes it fails at getting these replicas on. If you've got several servers with replicas of these partitions, I'd recommend trying to keep these to the domain controllers and maybe another eDirectory server just so that you have, in case you have LDAP applications that need to hit that, do a root DSE search. And so our domain is dsfw.novell.com, and our password, this is for the administrator, not just admin but the administrator. Our common proxy, we'll go ahead and create that. See, you get this option if you don't install DNS. In this case, you would select it. It has our DNS server in there because from our Etsy, our resolve.conf, and we retrieve our information. So and then basically do that, and you're pretty much done. We're going to go back and configure this to be a DNS server. So if you don't have another DNS server, it's good to have redundancy. So it can't hurt if you don't want to use this as a DNS server, but you might need some redundancy for now, or just as a backup. Go ahead and install it. You can always just turn it off. So this is what it looks like when you have the have it turned on. So we've got an additional few more fields here. Now, as you can see, we're using the proxy user, or the common proxy that's new with OS2 SB3. We did that on the first install, so that can present some problems if you use this to retrieve information. If you're not sure about the location, you want to make sure you get the information here right. What I would do is do the retrieve. As you can see, it's using the common proxy user, which generates a random password, which we don't know, so we can't enter that. So what I would recommend is just getting this information, selecting, copying it. If these are all different, then make sure you get the right context for each field. But then go back, come back forward again. It's unchecked again. We're back to using this DSfW proxy, that DSfW2, and we're just going to paste these values in. So this is really a reason why I would configure a specific DNS proxy user, so that you just have that one user that's used. You don't have to have multiple servers using multiple proxy users, and you'd have to have be able to it's unique to this server, so that would be basically setting up another proxy user for DNS for that server. So I don't know, it's my recommendation. I would when you first configure DNS, set up a specific DNS proxy user, and that way that user can be used for all the other servers instead of having to do individual ones. Like I said, the random password you can't really control. Alright, that's it. We got our review. If you want, you can go and make some modifications here. Say like LUM, if you want to LUM enable more services, this is the time to do it. Otherwise, you could go back and I wouldn't. By the way, I would not use the proxy user here either. But that's just, again, my opinion. If you want a proxy user, I would create my own user and give it the rights that you want it to have. Anyway, so if you want to, getting back to our services, so OpenWebM is by default done. We want to have SSH and other options into this server. This is the place to do it, nice and easy. Or you can just go and manually edit the PAM files afterwards. It's up to you. Alright, that's it. We'll let it go ahead and do the configuration, and I'll check back in when we get to the provisioning wizard. Okay, our configuration is finished. The YAST piece, I should say. So we see right here, we need to run the provisioning wizard. If we'll configure that later. Well, let's let it go. So if you have an existing DSFW server and you've been running it for a while and you've been keeping it patched, this is the time to patch this ADC server. You might want to patch it before you actually run the provisioning wizard, as that's what I thought. We'll work on that, do that later. So yeah, if you're completely patched up on your other server, I would recommend patching your server, your new server, to the same level as the existing DSFW server before running the provisioning wizard. But I mean, you can always, if you run into a problem, patching might help. You could always, if you run into a problem, you could always stop, patch, reboot, and continue to run the provisioning wizard. So here's our provisioning wizard. We'll go ahead and get that kicked off. Novel. Log in. And it's coming up. And here we go. So it's just like the other one. A few tasks are a little different because you don't need to do quite everything. You're not creating the domain. So, but many of them are the same. Adding the domain replica, the Slappy plugins, configuration partitions. Anyway, it's just, so this is the configuration partition, schema partition. If we didn't have that checked, these would not show up. We could go back and add it later. Again, a DSFW server, it's recommended that these two partitions exist. So we'll just go ahead and do a run all, and I'll check back in with you. Okay, just about to the end here. I made sure it stopped. I had like normal. Seems like on creating a partition, it usually fails the first time you run it again, and there's it. Usually on configuration or schema, one of them, I usually get a failure. Sometimes when I do the run all, that is. If I do it one at a time, usually I think there's somewhat of maybe it's just happening a little too fast. Give it time to recover, or just times out too fast. But anyway, that's it. It's installed. It's just like once you've done this, run the cleanup, you're done with the wizard. You can go ahead and close it out, and then follow. There's a tit on verifying a DSfW install. So we'll. I need to make this big so I can go all the way down and click finish. There we go. So got it installed. You could go through and follow this TID just like on any other install of DSfW. Some of them, like SAM account name, all this should already be there. You should have already checked that beforehand. But you just want to make sure specifically that your resolve.conf is still set up properly, that you can query the domain name, and you can run these provisioning commands just to make sure the domain controller is running. But that's it.